Well, I'd like to talk in this video about the Kuiper Belt, and I've got to emphasize that the Kuiper Belt has been really discovered in this millennium. So if you're a young person, this is information that I couldn't have talked about 15 years ago. We've learned an extensive amount about the Kuiper Belt. And let me just define the Kuiper Belt for you. The Kuiper Belt is a belt that exists outside of, mostly I should say, outside of the orbit of Neptune. And as you know, Neptune is the farthest planet from the Sun. Remember, Pluto's been downgraded. If you're too young to remember, Pluto used to be a planet. And they are, take a look, mostly the blue in there, that makes up most of the Kuiper Belt, but there are some other bodies out there, smaller bodies. Anything on the outside of Neptune, that's definitely the Kuiper Belt. Now, we do have some green bodies inside the orbit of Neptune, and these are what we tend to refer to as Kuiper Belt objects. And the reason for that is that they have actually been pulled into the outer solar system. So between the asteroid belt and Neptune, we find these green objects called centaurs, and these centaurs are actually Kuiper Belt objects that have been pulled out of the Kuiper Belt and into the inner solar system. And I'll give you an example of one later on. We can actually use it to study what's going on out there in the Kuiper Belt. But we don't need to do that because we just recently sent a satellite out to the Kuiper Belt. On its way out to the Kuiper Belt, it stopped by Pluto, and in July of 2015 it took this picture of Pluto. It's the first picture that we've ever had of Pluto up close. And on the surface already we've discovered that there's probably nitrogen and methane ice on the surface, kind of cool. And New Horizons is going to go out into the Kuiper Belt now and study the objects in the Kuiper Belt. And I think you can see from the previous slide, there's so many objects out in the Kuiper Belt. Before we knew there were all these objects in the Kuiper Belt, we thought Pluto was the only thing out there, and that's why it got planet status. But Pluto is not, as you probably already know, it's not within the orbit of our solar system, you know, this plane where all of the other planets orbit. Pluto is at an angle orbiting the Sun. So we don't think that it formed when the rest of the solar system formed. So it's unusual in a lot of ways. But here's another reason why it got downgraded. We found a lot of objects comparable in size to Pluto. Pluto is still the largest object in the Kuiper Belt, there's a good chance we might find something bigger, but for right now it's still the biggest planet. It has a moon called Charon, which in turn has moons, and then there's Eris, and Eris is actually more dense than Pluto. So we do have a denser object up there, Eris. Eris has a moon, and then you have all of the other objects, which we'll talk more about when we get to the Oort cloud, which is the most extreme body of material in the solar system. And so between Neptune and the Oort cloud, we have a whole mass of objects going out, and we'll get into more detail on some of these objects like Sedna a little bit later on. But these are the known big objects out there in the Kuiper Belt. And again, most of them besides like Pluto have been discovered in this millennium. Well, this is Phoebe. I was telling you about how we could study Kuiper Belt objects in our solar system by not having to travel to the Kuiper Belt, because Phoebe is a moon of Saturn, but it's believed to be a captured moon of Saturn that was picked up, and it's very different than anything we see in our solar system. That's why it's thought to come from the Kuiper Belt. It's not a spherical body, as you can see, and it's been hammered a lot by craters. And also on the cliffs there, you can see it's got probably ice of some sort. I don't know if it's water ice or methane or nitro, whatever it is. It looks an awful lot like ice on the crater walls there. So we don't have to go out and hunt around per se for Kuiper Belt objects, we can study them in